Hey, nice, applause. So yeah, this is about the Alpenglow consensus protocol, which hopefully will be the new Solana protocol. Maybe Solana doesn't have the best reputation for consensus. I don't know how you feel about this, but this maybe should solve it. So if you have flashbacks during my talk and you think this sounds a bit like Kuzu, so this is the fabulous Alpenkuzu. So there's 3 authors on both papers, and actually one author is shared. So he probably was a double agent between the 2 projects. And we don't quite know on which side he spied more, but many of the ideas are basically in both papers. So let's go back to Solana. What we want to have in Solana is we want to have high bandwidth and low latency. And I would say Solana is actually very good already regarding bandwidth. So we can put together, Solana has this erasure code system for many years now. You can actually add more machines, as many as you like, with different bandwidth, and it will work out nicely. But latency was, in some sense, was reasonable with Solana, but it's much better with Alpenglow. And the second thing we wanted to solve is security. So that's maybe a bit of a problem with Solana in the previous form. With Alpenglow, we get this 20 plus 20 security, which is basically the same thing as the 3F plus 2P, which is plus 1 we just seen. We just called it like that. It's a bit catchier marketing-wise. So we can tolerate 20% Byzantine stake and 20% crash failures or slow nodes or something like on top of that. So maybe up to 40% failures, which is a bit more than the usual holy 3F plus 1 thing. On this side. We think that the Byzantine failures are maybe a bit overrated in this community, okay? So 33% attacks in Solana would cost you literally billions of US dollars. So who is going to do that, right? Who is going to risk that much money? So we hardly ever see them, but crash failures we actually see quite a lot. So to have a higher crash tolerance is actually something we like. And maybe you know this meme about the Argentinian president, and apologies for the people who have seen this talk before or similar talks. So where he kind of rips off all the ministries in Argentina to make Argentina better, I guess. So we have the same thing for Solana. This is basically the consensus protocol of Solana today. These are like maybe the 4 cornerstones. Maybe you've heard of proof of history. Oh, maybe this one goes first. Tower BFT. We don't need it anymore. It was not very good. Proof of history. Victor actually wrote a nice paper about proof of history if you want to know about that. Solana uses gossip, which is also something I don't like so much. We try to not use it anymore in the future. We think there's faster communication than gossip, so this is gone. And Turbine is the one, the erasure coding part, which we really like. We kind of keep this. We're going to simplify it to Rotor. So that's what we use. And on the voting side, we basically were inspired by some recent work, I would say. And as I said, Kuzu is sort of related to Alpenglow, and we have the same inspiration to some sense. We have the original simplex consensus, which is simple, but I still think it's a really bad name, okay? So why did they choose a name? You know, there's like 10 algorithms that people know in the whole world in computer science, and the simplex algorithm is one of those 10 algorithms. Why do you use the same name? I don't get it. Okay, so we have this dispersed simplex, and then on the right-hand side, that's something Victor didn't mention, by Jan, who's in the audience, and others, which is probably the first paper which has this idea that you can do 2 round voting and 1 round voting right from the beginning, right? So this idea was around for a long time that you can do a 1 round voting protocol, and if it fails, then you can do a slower 2 round voting protocol. But Banyan was the first one that actually started both protocols at the same time. Banyan also had its problems, but I think this is, we should mention that. So these are maybe the 3 inspirations for us. And this becomes the voter protocol, which stuck as a name, even though it was a joke. So we have voter and rotor, and I'm going to explain them quickly. And sorry, here I went a bit overboard with the animations. So rotor is the data dissemination protocol. So what we have are blocks, basically, like you would think of a leader-based blockchain protocol where the leader can change over time. So we produce one block after the other. The blocks themselves, they are used for the consensus, and then each block, let's look at one block here in particular, is split up into slices. So slices are just like small blocks, and we use them for pipelining. So we can distribute the data of the slices very quickly, and we can execute that already. And so we can do this in a pipeline fashion. So that's what is very important to us. And each slice then itself is basically coded into shreds. So you just take the information of one slice, the data information, and you make a few shreds of them. And we're going to erasure code those shreds, which means we don't just send around these shreds that are basically a slice, but we, let's say, double the data, okay? That would be over-provisioning of factor of 2. So we have heard before 1.5 is maybe possible. 3 is also, has also advantages. So we chose 2, but there's no good reason for that. Maybe history, because Solana has always used 2. So these shreds then are being disseminated. So we have always a leader of the current block, which maybe produces these slices and then sends these shreds for each slice out. These shreds go to relays. The relays are basically all the other Solana nodes chosen by their stake. So with the probability of their stake. So if a Solana node has, let's say, 2% of the stake, there's a 2% chance that you get such a relay. If somebody has a lot of stake, can also get multiple relays. Then if you are a relay, you just send your shred to all the others, okay? So you can use fancy multicast for that, but it also works just to send to everybody. So this hurt me a little bit when I saw this first time, or when we kind of came up with the idea to do this like this, because you always will think, oh, let's make a complicated multi-level tree structure, because why would I send, so let's say 2,000 nodes? But sending the 2,000 nodes takes a few milliseconds, and Solana we have fast internet. And just having one more leg that you just send to somebody else who then sends to somebody else, that's already maybe 50, 60 milliseconds, so it's much, much slower. So this is actually the fastest way you can do this. So this is basically you send just to all the other nodes. And think of something like 2,000 nodes. We don't have much more for Solana. Good. Well, my voice, I don't know why this happens now. So we want to incentivize participation. So this is actually the biggest cost factor that we have in terms of bandwidth to send out these shreds. The leader does not have much bandwidth here, actually. It just has to send each shred exactly once, but then each relay has to send to 2,000 nodes. So that's basically 2,000 UDP packets. Everything we send around is at most one UDP packet. So this is the question we had before, what would be the over-provisioning? So we made a few simulations with the current Solana stake distribution in the world. So let's say if you have 32 shreds for each slice, and now the question is how many total shreds should we send out? Maybe let me go quickly here. So we could double like here, or we could even 10x it, right? So that's possible. And you see the red line here basically is how much latency we would have if we just send directly from the leader to any receiver, okay? If we had enough bandwidth to do that. And now, as it's clear, kind of if you over-provision more, then you have more direct paths, okay? Because you only need 32 shreds to get the whole block together again. So if you send 320 shreds to relays, you only need 32 of them, then chances are that these relays are on the path basically between leader and receiver, okay, for any receiver. And that's why the latency here is not much worse than just sending directly. But we will choose a factor of 2, and it gives you something a little bit more than 100 milliseconds here. And this is maybe one of the reasons I don't like these delta calculations so much. So many people talk about delta. That's sort of like another holy cow in this whole space, right? We have the 3f+1, we have these deltas. The reality is not with deltas, okay? So we have to, I think it would be much better to look at something else. I mean, the deltas and the 3f+1s, they come from a time when the n machines are basically in the same room or something like that, right? But in a worldwide distributed system, we don't have that anymore. So I think it would be great to be more fine-grained here. Now the voting part, so Victor spent some time on that. I'm going to be very fast on this, okay? So what we want is this kind of blockchain. We have leaders making a few blocks. So this is what this picture here shows. So every leader basically makes 4 blocks and then gives the baton to the next leader. And now we have this timeout. So it used to be proof of history, which nobody really understood. Actually, it's still that, but hopefully not for much longer. So now we have every other participant, every validator, every node basically checks from the time that they received the certificate for the last block from the previous leader until this next leader. How long are they willing to wait for these rotor disseminated shreds and slices, and that gives a timeout. So they can just vote yes or no, essentially, based on this block. This is what Victor called the first round vote. So we also have timeouts for the previous blocks for the same leader, and the reason is if one of those leaders is not working well, not participating how they should, we can actually vote them off much earlier, okay? So if block B1 is not coming in time, then the whole leader window for that leader will be gone, and we immediately go to leader C. So we send out this vote. Let's say this block came in time. We have this plus vote here, and we again send this to everybody, okay? That's a small message which can just send out in a few milliseconds, not much overhead. We also want to give some money for the votes. Actually, there's a common theme here. So we really want to incentivize the whole protocol, okay? So in many of these blockchain protocols, the participants basically do work, and there's no real reason why we should do this work, right? But we kind of want to incentivize the whole participation chain. So when you get these votes, then you could have this situation. This is just a recap from what Victor said. So you could have a lot of upvotes. Let's say if you see at least 80% of the stake voting for a particular block, meaning that it was correct and came in time, then you immediately finalize, okay? You get this finalization certificate, which is a BLS certificate, also fits nicely into a single UDP message. You just send it to everybody. Everybody can finalize as soon as they construct a BLS certificate or they get it from somebody. In the other extreme case, we have a lot of downvotes. They don't want that, and then we only need 60% downvotes, and that immediately gives us this skip certificate. Same thing, that's coming from Simplex, which we also can say this block is skipped. We don't have to talk about it anymore. Now, also that is sent out. So the mixed case is the most interesting case in the middle, where you have a bunch of upvotes, a bunch of downvotes that you get. Now, if, let's say, if you have the case that you get 60% upvotes, that would be also a typical case, okay? So that would be the case where we go into the second round, that we actually send an explicit finalization vote around. But for all mixed cases, we basically have a second round, okay? So that's what we do. For the two corner cases, we just have one round of voting, but in the middle, we have a second round of voting. So the hope is that this basically never happens, okay? But we'll see in a second, this can of course happen. We call these modes fallback votes. So when you say voted yes, but you don't see that the certificate for yes is coming and you have a timeout eventually, then you're also gonna say, I'm also fine with no, okay? That's exactly what Victor said as well. So you have these fallback votes. You can basically change your opinion to the other side, okay? You cannot reinforce your side. You can only change the opinion, so that you support also the other, liveness possibility. Okay, not sure how I'm going with time. Fine, right? So this is a paper you can read. So this is like the white paper that came out May 19th from Anza. There's also the double agent here. And we recently updated it to version 1.1, where we have, let's say, something like a related work actually inside. The original paper doesn't have it. So it's 50 plus pages. It's quite dense. Or maybe not dense, but I would say there's a lot of things in there, and we have a lot of, let's say, practical considerations in there. So for instance, how do we make this change between two leaders fast, okay? So if you're a leader yourself, you can just pump out these 4 blocks because you know you're a good guy, right? Everybody will vote for you, and you just optimistically pump out 4 blocks without waiting. But if you have a leader change, then the next leader wants to know whether the last block from the previous leader was in or out, right? And so what they do, for instance, is they start, if they have seen the previous block, they hope that it will be finalized. So they just optimistically say, let me start the block by doing that. But if they then see that there's a skip certificate coming for the previous block, then they can sort of, fail over and send out that after that. Good, so here's a nice slide, a little bit about measurements. So we implemented this to some degree. This is like a simulation implementation, I would say, where we simulate the network. This is basically for a New York-based leader. When you look at the stake at Solana, where the stake is sitting currently, how much latency you have, okay? So you see some nodes here have a lot of latency from New York. Others have almost no, there's some stake which is also in New York directly, right? And actually, this is 200 milliseconds. And these are like usually, let's say, other American nodes here, and then you see a bunch of European nodes. I don't know if you know, but Solana has actually quite a bit of stake in Europe. So there's a long plateau there, and then you have the rest of the world essentially. So this is just the network latency. And now this is basically our lower bound, right? We cannot be faster than this. So now we have this rotor data dissemination, and you see this curve is, at the beginning it's kind of very flat because you need to collect these 32 shreds out of the 64, and this takes time. So even for the people in the US here, there's not too much over-provisioning happening, so some things have to go, let's say, through Europe and back to come back, and then you see there's a bit of an overhead already here. Then we have the voting phase. So the first part of the voting phase is up to 60% yes votes. This just shows the good case where we have only yes votes. So you see at this point, the nodes have this so-called notarization certificate already, where they would say, looks good, but we have one more round of voting. And now this is when you have finality here. So either this can have several ways to get here. So either you basically go up to 80% votes from the first round, right? At this point, you collected 60% of the stake, but it takes a bit longer to take 80%. Or it could be that you had a second round of voting. So you had 60% of votes in, then you send your notarization out, and then you wait for 60% of those. And sometimes that's faster. Or sometimes maybe it's even faster that you get the finality certificate from somebody else, okay? So all three paths are possible. And actually the nodes here, some do this, some do that. They can completely mix and match however they want it. And that's sort of the idea of Banyan here implemented. Let me try to finish up. Maybe I was faster than I should have, but I don't know. I've given this talk so much, I get faster every time. So there's some open problems, and I would say, so these are the two biggest ones, okay? So that's a problem for us, I guess, for our engineers. So we have to now migrate from the current system to this system, okay? And that's not so easy, okay? So I would say this is basically changing a running system. So we have seen this from Ethereum a few, maybe 2 years back or something with the merge. And so this is, I would say, one of the biggest engineering feats you can have in computer science, right? That you have to change a running system with thousands of nodes into a different running system. So we'll have this problem. And I hope it works, otherwise I'm going to get some of the blame, I guess. And then the second big problem, I would say, is incentives. So I mentioned this before already, that we really want to incentivize the whole system. And this is now quite tricky. So far Solana actually sends votes on chain, so everybody sees what everybody else is doing, but this is not very fast, okay? So our system is much faster. And you remember, like we had this rotor and voter data dissemination parts, so we had to send to everybody basically. So the votes go to everybody else, and also the shreds when you relay go to everybody else. So the only people who can judge whether you actually do your work is all the other nodes, okay? So the question is, how do we make sure that everybody works correctly? And this is something we haven't solved so far, I would say. We just make some assumptions and have some simplification so far, but we are working hard to maybe even make that completely, game theoretically correct, in the sense that, you collect what others have been telling about others, and then you make a decision how much SOL everybody should get in this protocol. Good. So this is just related to this point. So you see here how much bandwidth you're going to use. Let's say if you want to have something like 500 megabits per second good put in terms of transactions. So that's a high number, but that's something we really should be able to achieve. And you can see here, this is a logarithmic scale, so it's a bit complicated to see. Again, on the x-axis, we have the sort of stake, like some nodes are highly staked, some nodes are not so highly staked. Regarding voting, what the voter part is, everybody has to do the same work. So they send about 30 megabits per second data around just to vote on the blocks. And then you have the rotor part, which for the really high stake nodes, they have to send around a lot of traffic. However, these people, these are professionals, right? So they have thousands of machines actually. And the rotor part is nice because you don't need one machine to do that work for you. Basically what you get is a shred from somebody and then you just send it to everybody else, right? So you can completely, there's no signature errors or anything you have to do. You just get what you get in, you send out, right? So that's a very fast thing you can actually replicate nicely without state. Good, yeah, maybe one more slide on this and then I'm done, yeah. So, yeah, this is a meme, maybe I should explain it. So when you talk to validators, they would say something like this, right? You know, we're not Byzantine, we try to do the best for our protocol, right? We're all Solana fans or whatnot. And of course I follow the rules, I'm not a Byzantine guy. But when you present something as a game, for instance, when you say, oh, let's report what others are doing, then they start thinking, then they say, oh, if I say I got less shreds from that guy, then I look better in comparison to that guy. So maybe I should, you know, misreport a little bit. That would be Byzantine, right? That's not doing what you're supposed to do. But sort of like when you present things at the game, then people will see it as a game. So that's sort of like the problem we have a little bit. I'm not saying that they are like that, but you can really, like whenever you propose something, you immediately see their brain starting to work, maybe I can game this. Good, yeah, so that summarizes the whole talk. So I talked about the rotor and voter, which are the key ingredients of this new Solana consensus protocol, and a bit of statistics and what our main problems are. Thanks for listening.
Any questions?
Why 4 blocks per liter?
That's just historic. So currently it's 4 blocks per liter, and whenever we felt something is not so bad, we just kept it for the moment. This is, however, something we might change in the future. There are arguments to just do 1 block per liter as well, because you can then have less MEV extraction. But on the other hand, you have this like liter change, a bit of a downside. So for us, 4 blocks was kind of a reasonable thing, and we didn't want to change all the things.
Any more questions?
I was wondering.
Could you just summarize like the key differences from kudzu?
Yeah, so in the paper there's a whole page on this actually. So because when we came out and then the second version kudzu also came out, and we wanted to do that. I would say the main differences are this is proof of stake. Kudzu is just n nodes, so that's maybe something which is immediately visible. So our bounds look a little bit different. Then we have a lot of thought about corner cases in the paper. So what happens if you don't make progress for so much time? What would you do then? They don't have that. This is more like an academic paper. Ours is more like a practical paper. But they were both really developed at the same time. So I would not want to say this was first or that was late.
I guess the crash faults as well, right? The crash faults, do you consider crash faults?
No, I think that's the same thing for them, right? They have this 3f+2p, and I think they don't specify what f and p is, whereas we just say, let's do 2020, that's good enough. But I think this idea is also in kudzu.
Cool. Let's thank Roger again.
Yeah, thanks.